June 24, 1941. The endless expanse near Grodno, in what was just days ago Soviet-occupied Poland. The heat is already oppressive at 0900 hours, a shimmering haze rising from the dusty steppe that distorts the horizon. Inside the turret of Panzer III No. 421, Hauptmann Erich Weber wipes a slurry of sweat and engine grime from his goggles. The air inside the steel box is thick, a nauseating cocktail of diesel fumes, hot oil, and the metallic tang of cordite from earlier engagements. But Weber doesn't mind the smell. To him, it is the scent of victory. Through his commander's cupola, the view is monotonous, but exhilarating. The vast expanse of Russia is opening up before the tracks of his Panzer division. Ahead, columns of black smoke stain the pale blue sky, funeral pyres for Soviet transport columns caught in the open by the Luftwaffe. "Driver, keep this pace," Weber orders over the intercom, his voice crackling with the confident static of a man who has seen nothing but success. "Don't let the infantry fall too far behind." He pats the breech of the 50mm KWK-38 cannon next to him. This gun, along with the short-barreled 75mm howitzers on the support Panzer IVs, had cracked the best armor France and Britain could throw at them a year ago. They had sliced through the Ardennes, raced to the Channel, and brought Paris to its knees. Now, facing the disorganized, chaotic masses of the Red Army, the crews of the Panzerwaffe felt untouchable. The intelligence briefings had been clear. The Soviet Union was a rotting structure, ready to collapse with one solid kick to the door. Their tanks were numerous, yes, but they were understood to be obsolete junk, thin-skinned T-20 SIXS and fast but fragile BT-7s that burned fiercely when hit. Weber had already seen dozens of them gutted by the roadside in the first 48 hours of Operation Barbarossa, their crews scattered or dead. The German war machine was a precision instrument slicing through rusted iron. Behind Weber's armored spearhead, rolling along in soft-skinned Opel Blitz trucks and half-tracks, the mechanized infantry shared this intoxicating arrogance. Among them is Oberstleutnant Hans Richter, part of an anti-tank detachment towing their primary weapon, the 3.7 cm Pak 36. It's a neat, lightweight little gun. Richter and his crew love it. It can be manhandled easily into position by two men, hidden in tall grass, and fired rapidly. In Poland and France, they had learned its limitations against heavier tanks like the Char B1 or the British Matilda, often having to aim for tracks or vision slits. But against the light Soviet armor they were currently encountering, the Pak 36 was a butcher. They rattle over the rutted dirt road, choked by the dust of 1,000 vehicles ahead of them. Richter leans against the gun's shield, joking with his loader. They are young, tanned, and high on the momentum of the Blitzkrieg. They possess an absolute, unshakable faith in German engineering superiority. The idea that the Slavic subhumans they were invading could design, let alone build, anything capable of challenging a Krupp steel panzer or resisting their high-velocity armor-piercing shells was laughable. This was the mood of the Wehrmacht in those opening weeks of the Crusade in the East. It was a summer of supreme confidence, where every kilometer gained reinforced the belief that the war was already won, and that the tools they carried were the apex of military technology. They were masters of the battlefield, driving deep into a primitive land, completely unaware that the technological landscape had already shifted beneath their tracks. The dust cloud continues to move east, carrying with it thousands of men like Weber and Richter, driving straight toward a collision that would shatter their reality. The column grinds to a halt just outside a nameless village south of Alidus. The radio in Hauptmann Weber's Panzer crackles with urgent, confusing reports from the reconnaissance motorcycle troops ahead. They are screaming about heavy armor, blocking the bridge crossing, a claim Weber dismisses with a scoff. Heavy armor? Here? The intelligence reports said the heavy KV tanks were further north. Whatever is ahead is likely just an entrenched position or a panicked hallucination by the scouts. Weber orders his platoon to hold position while the infantry clears the obstacle. He opens his hatch to get some air, watching the anti-tank detachment scramble forward. Oberstleutnant Richter and his crew hustle their 3.7 cm Pak 36 off the back of the Opel Blitz. They are moving with practiced efficiency, dragging the small, wheeled gun through a ditch and up a shallow berm overlooking the village road. The wheat field around them is high, providing excellent concealment. Target at 11 o'clock. Richter's commander hisses, pointing toward a copse of birch trees. Armor emerging. Richter presses his eye to the telescopic sight. He expects the boxy, riveted silhouette of a T-26 or the spindly wheels of a BT-7. Instead, what rolls out of the tree line makes him pause. It is low. Incredibly low. The machine is painted a dark, forest green, contrasting sharply with the golden wheat. But it is the shape that confuses Richter's brain. There are no flat vertical plates. The front of the hull is steeply angled back, a glassy plate of smooth steel that looks almost aerodynamic. The turret, too, is curved and pushed forward on the chassis. It moves with a strange, predatory grace, its wide tracks churning the earth with a distinct, clattering roar. The sound of a high-torque diesel engine, not the gasoline engines the Germans are used to. Range, 400 meters, the loader barks, shoving a 37mm armor-piercing shell into the breech. The breech block snaps shut with a reassuring metallic clack. Target identified. Fire. Richter aligns the crosshairs on the flat side of the turret, or what he thinks is the flat side. It's a perfect kill shot. At this range, the high-velocity tungsten cord shell should punch through a standard Soviet tank, rattle around inside, and ignite the fuel. He squeezes the trigger. The gun bucks violently against his shoulder, kicking up a puff of dust. Crack. Richter watches through the sight, waiting for the telltale plume of black smoke or the hatch to fly open. Instead, he sees a bright flash of sparks erupt from the Soviet tank's turret. The tracer streak of his shell ricochets violently upward, spiraling harmlessly into the sky like a frantic firework. Missed, the loader asks, confused. Hit, Richter mutters, a cold knot forming in his stomach. It just bounced. Load. Hurry. The Soviet tank hasn't noticed them yet. It continues to lumber forward, its long 76mm cannon sweeping slowly from left to right. Richter adjusts his aim. He targets the hull this time, right in the center of that sloped front plate. Crack. Another violent recoil. Another streak of light. This time, the sound of the impact reaches them, a hollow, ringing clang that echoes across the field. It is the sound of a sledgehammer hitting a solid anvil. The shell strikes the angled armor and skates off the surface, deflected by the sheer geometry of the design. There is no penetration. No explosion. Just a scratch on the green paint. It's not going in. Richter yells, panic starting to bleed into his voice. The angle is too steep. Down the line, other Pak 36 crews have opened fire. A hail of 37mm shells hammers the advancing tank. They spark and whine off the steel beast like hail hitting a tin roof. Richter watches in horror as the tracers simply disintegrate or deflect. The Soviet crew inside the machine finally reacts to the annoying staccato of impacts. The turret stops rotating. The long barrel dips slightly, traversing toward Richter's position on the berm. He sees us. Richter screams. The nickname for their beloved gun, the Heeresanklopfgerät, or Army Door Knocker, is born in this terrifying instant. They are literally knocking on the door of the enemy, and the enemy is refusing to answer. The weapon that had conquered Europe is suddenly nothing more than a toy. A flash of flame erupts from the T-34's main gun. The shockwave flattens the wheat ahead of it. Richter dives into the dirt just as a high-explosive shell impacts the berm 5 meters to his right. The earth heaves. The concussion feels like a physical blow to the chest, knocking the wind out of him. Dirt and shrapnel rain down on his helmet. When he looks up, ringing ears filled with a high-pitched whine, he sees the neighboring gun crew is gone, replaced by a smoking crater and twisted metal. The T-34, ignoring the pathetic impacts of the door knockers, accelerates. It is coming straight for the infantry lines, and Richter realizes with a dawning horror that they have nothing, absolutely nothing, that can stop it 500 meters back from the commander's cupola of Panzer IV. Hauptmann Erich Weber watches the scene unfold with a growing sense of disbelief. Through his Zeiss binoculars, he sees the puff of smoke from Richter's Pak 36 followed instantly by the terrifying shower of sparks on the green tank's hull. He sees the return fire, the geyser of earth that swallows the German gun crew. The arrogance of the morning evaporates, replaced by the cold, professional adrenaline of combat. Panzer, march. Weber barks into his throat microphone. Driver, advance right. Gunner, load armor-piercing. Target 12 o'clock. That green bastard. The Maybach engine roars behind him, and 20 tons of German steel lurch forward. Weber feels a grim satisfaction. The infantry guns failed, but this is a job for the Panzerwaffe. His Panzer III is superior, better optics, better radio coordination, a faster-firing 50mm KWK-38 cannon. The T-34 is now focused on wrecking the soft-skinned transport trucks lagging behind the infantry, its machine guns chattering. It hasn't spotted Weber's approach through the tall wheat. Range 350, his gunner reports, his voice tight with concentration. The turret traverse winds hydraulically, bringing the long 50mm barrel to bear on the Soviet flank. It is a textbook ambush shot. A flat angle on side armor. Fire. The tank rocks violently as the cannon discharges. Weber keeps his eyes glued to the periscope. He sees the tracer streak true, slamming squarely into the side of the T-34's turret.
Clang.
Weber blinks. There's a gouge in the steel, a bright smudge where the tungsten core impacted, but the shell has deflected upwards, spinning away into the distance. The sloped geometry of the Soviet design isn't just on the front. The turret sides are angled too, presenting an effective thickness that defies the physics Weber learned at the training academy. Did we miss? The driver asks anxiously.
Hit.
Non-penetration. Weber snaps, a tremor entering his voice. Load again. Fast. Before his loader can slam another shell into the breach, the T-34's turret snaps around with alarming speed. The long 76.2mm barrel, significantly larger than anything on a German medium tank, points directly at Weber's face.
Time seems to dilate.
Weber realizes with sickening clarity that he is sitting in an obsolete tin can. His 50mm gun is a pea shooter against this monster. Even the support Panzer IVs nearby, with their short-barreled 75mm howitzers, are useless. Their low-velocity, high-explosive shells would just wash over that sloped armor like water off a duck's back. The T-34 fires. The impact is terrifying. It doesn't hit the turret, but strikes the front lower hull of Weber's Panzer III. The 76mm shell punches through the German vertical armor plate as if it were wet cardboard. The violent overpressure inside the crew compartment is instantaneous. Weber's ears pop, and the tank immediately fills with acrid white smoke. Bail out. Bail out. Weber screams, choking, clawing at the hatch release above his head. He tumbles out of the cupola, sliding down the side of his burning tank, hitting the ground hard. He scrambles on hands and knees through the wheat, coughing, his lungs burning. Behind him, the ammunition inside Panzer 421 begins to cook off, a series of muffled explosions that send the turret hatch cartwheeling into the air. Weber looks up from the dirt. The T-34 is still moving. It hasn't even slowed down. It is rolling right past the burning wreckage of his platoon commander's tank, tracks clattering with the indifference of a god. Around him, the German assault has collapsed into pure chaos. The radio net, so disciplined an hour ago, is a cacophony of panic. My shells are bouncing. Cannot penetrate. Help, it's coming right at us. Infantrymen are scattering, abandoning their useless anti-tank rifles. Trucks are reversing wildly, colliding with each other in a desperate bid to escape. The apex predators of the battlefield, the masters of Blitzkrieg, have suddenly found themselves at the bottom of the food chain. They have encountered a ghost, a machine that wasn't supposed to exist, something that has rendered their entire arsenal obsolete in the span of 10 terrifying minutes. Weber presses his face into the Russian dirt as the T-34 lumbers past, the ground shaking beneath him. For the first time since the war began, he feels the cold grip of genuine fear. This crusade in the east is not going to be a summer drive to Moscow. The sun is high overhead now, baking the battlefield in a surreal, shimmering heat. But the heat Hauptmann Weber feels as he crawls through a muddy irrigation ditch is pure terror. Behind him, the funeral pyre of his Panzer III sends black, oily smoke curling into the sky, joining the dozens of other pillars marking the graveyard of the German advance. It isn't just one tank anymore. Over the rise, 3 more of the green beasts appear. They move in a loose, uncoordinated wedge, their diesel engines growling with a deep, throaty bass that drowns out the frantic shouts of the German infantry. They are T-34s of the 5th Tank Division, brought up from reserve to plug the gap. To the terrified Lancer on the ground, they look like prehistoric monsters ascending from the primeval mud of Russia. Oberstfreiter Richter is running. He has abandoned the twisted wreckage of his Pak 36. Around him, the vaunted discipline of the Wehrmacht is fraying. Men are scrambling past him, eyes wide, dropping rifles and helmets. He sees another anti-tank crew, brave or foolish, desperately trying to slew their little 37mm gun around to face the new threat. Don't bother, Richter wants to scream at them. It's useless. Save yourselves. He watches as the lead T-34 doesn't even bother to fire its main gun at them. It simply accelerates. The driver, buttoned up inside his steel cocoon, steers straight for the gun's shield. The German crew scatters seconds before impact. The wide tracks of the T-34, designed for the Russian mud and snow, crush the Krupp steel gun into the dirt with a sickening crunch of metal, grinding it into scrap as if it were made of tin foil. The tank rolls on without pausing. This is a new kind of warfare. The Germans are used to being the hammer. Now they are the anvil. Desperation breeds insane courage. Near a burning half-track, Weber sees an infantry Oberleutnant rally a small squad. They are armed not with anti-tank rifles, which they have already thrown away in disgust, but with bundles of stick grenades wired together and Molotov cocktails hastily improvised from gasoline jerry cans. Wait for it to pass, the officer screams over the din of battle. Hit the engine deck. It's the only way. A T-34 lumbers past their position, its turret traversing toward a distant target. The infantrymen burst from cover. It is a suicidal charge. One man is cut down immediately by the tank's hull machine gun. Another manages to scramble onto the rear deck, slipping on the diesel slick steel. He jams a grenade bundle under the turret overhang and rolls off just as it detonates. A muffled crump. Smoke billows from the engine louvers. The T-34 shudders, its tracks grinding to a halt. The crew bails out, coughing, hands raised in surrender. A cheer goes up from the nearby ditch, but it is short-lived. It took half a squad and incredible luck to disable just one. The other 2 T-34s are still rampaging through the rear echelon, smashing supply trucks and scattering a mortar platoon. They are immune to almost everything the Germans possess. The standard-issue 37mm Pak is a joke. The 50mm tank guns are ineffective except at suicidal point-blank ranges against the sides. The short 75mm guns are useless. For the first time, the German soldier on the Eastern Front feels a profound sense of betrayal. The propaganda had told them they were fighting subhumans with inferior technology. The intelligence briefings had promised an easy victory against obsolete equipment. Lying in that ditch, covered in mud and the blood of his comrades, Weber realizes it was all a lie. The Soviets had built a master weapon, and they had done it in total secrecy. The T-34 was faster, better armed, and infinitely better armored than anything Germany had on the drawing board. The realization hits the ranks like a physical blow. The technical superiority upon which their entire Blitzkrieg doctrine rested has just evaporated in a Russian wheat field. Eventually, the remaining T-34s, low on fuel and ammunition, turn and rumble back toward the east, leaving behind a shattered landscape and a deeply traumatized division. The shooting dies down, replaced by the groans of the wounded and the crackle of burning vehicles. Hauptmann Weber sits up in the ditch, staring at his smoldering Panzer. He pulls off his officer's cap and wipes sweat from a face now etched with a new, hard reality. The easy war is over. The nightmare has just begun. 2 days later. a forward repair depot near Minsk. The chaos of the initial contact has settled into a grim, brooding silence. Under the gray drizzle of a typical Russian summer afternoon, a crowd of German officers and engineers stands in a muddy field. In the center of the circle sits the prize, a captured T-34, immobilized by a track hit and abandoned by its crew. Hauptmann Weber stands at the edge of the circle, his arm in a sling, a souvenir from his scramble out of Panzer IV. Beside him stands Oberstreiter Richter, looking haggard, his uniform stained with oil and dirt. They aren't supposed to be here. This is a show for the brass, but no one chases them away. They are the survivors. They have earned the right to look the monster in the eye. A colonel from the Waffenamt, Army Weapons Agency, is climbing over the green hull, tapping the steel with a small hammer, measuring angles with a protractor. He looks like a man trying to solve a puzzle that defies the laws of physics. 60 degrees, the colonel mutters, loud enough for the circle to hear. The glassy plate is sloped at 60 degrees. Weber stares at the tank. Up close, it looks crude compared to his lost Panzer III. The welding is rough, the casting marks are visible, and the finish is agricultural. It lacks the refined, clockwork precision of German engineering. There are no comfort amenities for the crew, no complex optics, no sophisticated radio networks. But none of that matters. It's genius, Weber whispers, almost to himself. Richter looks at him, confused. It looks like a tractor, a Hauptmann. Look at those gaps in the welding. It doesn't matter, Richter, Weber replies, stepping closer. He runs his good hand over the cold, wet steel of the front plate. Look at the angle. Our shells didn't bounce because the armor was too thick. They bounced because of the geometry. A 45mm plate at this angle effectively becomes 90mm of steel to an incoming shell. And we were shooting 37mm pebbles at it. The realization is rippling through the German high command. General Heinz Guderian, the father of the Blitzkrieg, had arrived earlier that morning. He had been pale, his usual fiery demeanor replaced by a cold, calculating dread. He had climbed inside the cramped turret, sat in the gunner's seat, and emerged looking 10 years older. The reports going back to Berlin were already frantic. The T-34 is the finest tank in the world, Guderian would later write. We have nothing comparable. The inspection continues. The engineers open the rear engine deck. Instead of a flammable gasoline engine like the Maybachs that powered the German fleet, they find a V2 diesel engine made of aluminum. Diesel, a mechanic spits, wiping grease from his hands. Harder to ignite. More torque. And look at these tracks. He points to the wide, flat tracks that droop over the road wheels. They're broad, 50 centimeters wide. Our panzers sink in this Russian muck. This thing? It floats over it. Weber listens to the technical dissection, feeling a growing pit of anger in his stomach. For years, they had been told that Soviet industry was capable only of copying Western designs badly. They were told the Slavs were technically illiterate. Yet here, sitting in the mud, was a war machine that had fundamentally solved the trinity of tank design: firepower, mobility, and protection. The T-34 had a 76mm gun that could kill any German tank from 1,000 meters. It had armor that made it immune to German fire at standard combat ranges. And it could move through terrain that bogged the Wehrmacht down. What are we going to do? Richter asks quietly, voicing the fear of every soldier in the depot. If they build enough of these, they will build enough of them, Weber says grimly. And we have to change everything. The shock of the T-34 didn't just bruise egos, it shattered the German procurement plans. The frantic meetings taking place in field tents that evening would change the course of the war. The existing upgrade plans for the Panzer III and IV were scrapped or accelerated wildly. The demand went out immediately to German industry. Copy this. They needed a counter. They needed a predator that could hunt this beast. Weber watches as a recovery vehicle begins to tow the T-34 away for shipping back to Germany, to be torn apart and studied down to the molecular level. He knows that the tank he is watching is the father of the next generation of German armor. The sleek angles of the T-34 would eventually be mirrored in the design of the Panther tank, a desperate attempt to match Soviet innovation. But for now, there is no Panther. There is no Tiger. There is only the summer of 1941, and an army that has suddenly realized it is fighting the wrong war with the wrong weapons. Weber turns to Richter. Get your crew ready, Oberstreiter. Find a new gun. Or bigger grenades. Because until Berlin builds us something better, we're going to have to get a lot closer to kill these things. The sun sets over the depot, casting long shadows.
The door knockers have been silenced.
The age of innocent conquest is over. The war of attrition, of heavy steel and industrial might, has officially begun. October 1941. The Russian steppes have turned from a dust bowl into a sea of freezing mud, soon to harden into iron-hard ice. Hauptmann Weber stands in the turret of a new command tank, but the arrogance of June is a distant memory. The German advance has slowed to a crawl. The door knockers, those beloved 37mm guns, are now being abandoned in droves by the roadside, their crews preferring to trust their luck with captured Soviet anti-tank rifles or the terrifying, improvised magnetic mines they must attach by hand. The appearance of the T-34 didn't just win battles, it inflicted a psychological disease upon the Wehrmacht, known as Panzerangst, tank terror. The rumors fly down the line faster than orders. There are thousands of them, the men whisper in the trenches. They are building them in tractor factories beyond the Urals. And they were right. While German engineers tinkered with over-engineered, complex machines that froze in the winter, the Soviet Union was churning out T-34s with the relentless, brute force of an industrial avalanche. Richter is still alive, though he looks 10 years older than the boy who laughed on the sunny road to Grodno. He now mans a 5cm Pak 38, a heavier gun rushed to the front to replace the useless door knocker. It can kill a T-34, but only with special tungsten ammunition, and only if he lets the tank get terrifyingly close. He watches the horizon, his breath steaming in the frigid air. He knows that out there, in the driving snow, the green monsters are waiting. They are no longer a surprise. They are the grim reality of the Eastern Front. The shock of that first summer would ripple through the war for years. Back in Germany, the frantic panic to counter the T-34 would give birth to the Panther tank, a machine that copied the T-34's sloped armor and wide tracks so shamelessly that early prototypes were almost mistaken for the Soviet tank itself. It would lead to the heavy Tiger I, a desperate attempt to create a tank that could finally dominate the battlefield again. But it was too late. The myth of German invincibility had been shattered on the sloped glassy plate of a Soviet medium tank. As the war drags on, the T-34 evolves. It gets a bigger turret, a bigger 85mm gun, and arrives in numbers that defy comprehension. For every one Weber's platoon destroys, 3 more crest the hill. The door knocker joke isn't funny anymore. It is a bitter reminder of the hubris that led them here. In the end, the image that defines the failure of Barbarossa isn't a burning city or a frozen soldier. It is the memory of Oberstreiter Richter's 37mm shell spiraling harmlessly into the sky, bouncing off the steel hide of a machine the Germans didn't believe could exist. Weber closes his hatch against the biting wind. The road to Moscow is blocked. And sitting across it, silent and menacing in the snow, is the tank that saved the Soviet Union.